Horrifyingly, when a poor, emaciated woman, exhausted from hunger and despair, is desperately racing to her dying mother's side on a freezing Christmas night, she unintentionally rests her head on the shoulder of a strange man on the late-night train. A man whose life she once saved from the clutches of death years ago, without ever knowing it. Can you believe that just that single moment of falling asleep from sheer exhaustion would become the beginning of a passionate love story filled with tears, where intense love must confront extreme poverty, life-threatening illness, and deadly shadows from the underworld? A woman who once had to choose between medicine for her child and food for the whole family is now loved by Chicago's most powerful man, to the point where he's willing to burn down his entire empire to protect her. What happens when the most passionate love stems from the deepest life debt? And the price of that love, is it blood and tears? Stay with me, because this story will melt your heart. Then make it pound with suspense until you're breathless. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions, or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. All right, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. Sarah Jennings stared at her pale, hollow-cheeked reflection in the cracked mirror of the nurse's locker room at John H. Stroger Jr., Hospital of Cook County, the harsh, fluorescent lights doing nothing to hide the deep shadows under her tired blue eyes. At 33, she looked far older, thin, almost fragile, her frame worn down by endless night shifts in the chaotic emergency room, where gunshot wounds, overdoses, and desperate families poured in without cease. Her hands, still trembling from the cold December wind that whipped through Chicago's streets, splashed icy water on her face, trying to chase away the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She had no choice. The call from her Aunt Mary in Springfield had come just hours ago, shattering what little peace she had left. "Sarah, honey, you need to come now," Mary's voice had broken over the phone. "Your mom, the doctors say it might be tonight." Cancer had ravaged her mother for over a year, but Sarah had been too buried in debt and survival to visit as often as she should have. Now, on this bitter Christmas night in 2025, with Chicago gripped by freezing temperatures and scattered flurries, Sarah was racing against time. Her 7-year-old son, Ethan, waited at home in their tiny Logan Square apartment with a neighbor. His rare autoimmune disease meant constant worry, expensive medications she could barely afford on her nurse's salary, and treatments that drained every spare dollar. Poverty clung to Sarah like the threadbare winter coat she wore, patched and insufficient against the wind. Rent was overdue again, utilities threatened cutoff, and Ethan's school supplies came from charity drives. She had skipped meals for weeks, her body malnourished and weak, nights spent shivering in the drafty apartment because heat cost too much. Humiliation burned in her chest, applying for food assistance, begging for shift extensions, watching Ethan pretend not to notice when dinner was just peanut butter on stale bread. Life had been a relentless grind of unfair blows. Her ex walking out years ago, medical bills piling up, no family safety net. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them. She had to stay strong. For Ethan, for her mom. This Amtrak ticket south to Springfield was only possible because Aunt Mary had wired a little money. Sarah clutched her small backpack. Inside, her scrubs, a few changes of clothes, and her father's old Chicago Bears jacket, the only keepsake that brought any warmth. Saying goodbye to Ethan that morning had nearly destroyed her. He had clung to her legs, his small face pale and worried. "Mommy, why can't I come?" His brown eyes had filled with tears. She had knelt, forcing a smile through her own heartbreak. "Sweetie, I'll call every day, and I'll bring you something special, okay?" A lie. She had no idea how she'd manage even that. The final call for the late-night Lincoln service train jolted her back. Sarah grabbed her bag and hurried through Union Station, her worn sneakers slipping slightly on the icy floor. She barely made it aboard before the doors closed, collapsing into a seat in the quiet car, her heart pounding with anxiety and grief. Across the aisle sat a man who seemed out of place in coach. Tall, fair-skinned, impeccably dressed in a dark wool overcoat that screamed quiet wealth. His sharp features were focused on a tablet, but Sarah barely noticed. Exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The train lurched out into the snowy night, and despite her fight to stay awake, her eyelids grew heavy. The gentle sway, the distant hum of the engine, it was too much. Her head tilted sideways, coming to rest gently on the stranger's broad shoulder. She didn't know how long she slept, but when awareness returned, horror flooded her. She had been leaning against him, perhaps even drooling on his expensive coat. Sarah jerked upright, her face burning with mortification, dizziness washing over her from the sudden movement. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice soft and timid, pulling away as if burned. The man, Alex Moretti, turned calmly, his deep green eyes meeting hers without a trace of annoyance. Inside, a storm raged. Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly, remnants of a life built on power and shadows, the weight of decisions that haunted his nights. Yet something about this fragile woman stirred a fierce, unexpected protectiveness, a remorse for the world's cruelty, a violent conflict between his guarded heart and this sudden, overwhelming surge. He felt it instantly, intensely, a pull toward her vulnerability, her quiet strength amid obvious suffering. It terrified him, this passion igniting without warning. "You needed the rest," he said simply, his voice low and steady, draping his cashmere coat over her shoulders when he noticed her shiver. Sarah froze, confusion and fear mixing with a strange, disorienting warmth. Who was this man? In a city like Chicago, kindness from strangers, especially one so powerfully composed, felt suspicious, guarded curiosity rising amid her numbness. Outside, as the train sped through the dark, snowy Illinois landscape, rival shadows loomed in Alex's world. Earlier that day, a tense standoff on the streets near the Gold Coast had unfolded, his men exchanging heated words with a rival crew encroaching on territory. Words sharp but restrained, no shots fired, yet the threat hung heavy. He had handled it with cold authority, but the guilt twisted deeper. How many more confrontations before someone innocent paid? Sarah clutched the coat, her inner turmoil intensifying. Desperation, poverty's humiliating grip, now this absurd unfairness of a stranger's generosity. Shock numbed her, tears pricking as dizziness returned. For the first time in years, amid the cold and grief, she felt a flicker of something dangerously like hope. But fear whispered, nothing good came without a price. Sarah Jennings did not know how long she had been asleep, only that when her eyes fluttered open, the train was still rocking gently through the frozen Illinois night, and her cheek rested against something warm, solid, and impossibly expensive. The scent of fine wool and subtle cologne wrapped around her like a blanket she had never owned. For one disoriented heartbeat, she thought she was dreaming, because nothing in her life had ever felt this safe. Then reality slammed into her, cold and humiliating, and she realized with a sick lurch that her head was on the shoulder of the stranger beside her. Horror flooded her thin frame. She jerked upright so quickly the world tilted, dizziness washing over her in a nauseating wave. Her malnourished body, weakened by weeks of skipped meals and endless shifts, protested the sudden movement with a sharp stab of pain behind her eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, fighting the numbness that crept up her arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice small and timid, barely audible over the low hum of the train. Shame burned her cheeks hotter than any fever. She, Sarah Jennings, who had not owned a new coat in 6 years, who sometimes woke to find frost on the inside of her apartment window because the heat had been shut off again. She had drooled on a stranger's cashmere overcoat. The coat alone probably cost more than she earned in 3 months of blood and sleepless nights in the ER. The man turned his head slowly. In the dim blue glow of the quiet car, Sarah saw him clearly for the first time. Fair-skinned, late 30s, with sharp, handsome features that belonged on the cover of a magazine rather than in an Amtrak coach seat. His dark hair was neatly styled despite the late hour, and his green eyes held a depth that made her breath catch. Calm on the surface, but underneath something turbulent, something haunted. Alex Moretti felt the jolt like a bullet to the chest the moment her head had settled against him. He had not moved, had not dared breathe too deeply, afraid to disturb the fragile trust she had unconsciously placed in him. Guilt, raw and gnawing, tore through him. He had built an empire on fear and loyalty, had ordered things done in shadowed alleys that would make this woman recoil in terror if she knew. Yet here she was, thin shoulders shaking with cold, wearing a patched bear's jacket 2 sizes too big, carrying grief and exhaustion so heavy it was a miracle she was still upright. And she had chosen his shoulder to rest on. Remorse flooded him, violent and unfamiliar. He had spent years convincing himself he was beyond redemption, that the blood on his ledger could never be washed away. But watching her sleep, cheeks hollow, lips pale, dark circles carved beneath her lashes, he felt something crack wide open inside his chest. A fierce, burning protectiveness surged through him, so intense it frightened him. It was not pity, it was deeper, more dangerous. In that single quiet moment, Alex Moretti fell, hard, completely, and without warning. Love, raw and overwhelming, ignited in him like a wildfire he had no hope of controlling. He masked it behind calm composure, the way he masked everything. "You needed the rest," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, carrying the faint authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. When he noticed her shivering again, he slipped his overcoat from his own shoulders and draped it over hers without asking permission. The cashmere settled around her like a cloud, warm and impossibly soft against her threadbare sweater. Sarah stared at him, confusion and fear warring in her chest. The coat weighed almost nothing, yet felt like 1,000 pounds of kindness she did not deserve and could not repay. Her fingers clutched the lapels instinctively, pulling it tighter. I can't take this," she stammered, voice soft, polite, edged with the guarded timidity of someone who had learned long ago that gifts always came with strings. "You're freezing," Alex replied simply. His tone left no room for argument, yet there was no arrogance in it, only quiet certainty. Inside, the conflict raged. He wanted to give her everything: warmth, safety, a life where she never had to choose between medicine for her son and food on the table. But he knew who he was, knew the darkness that followed him, and still the need to protect her clawed at him with violent intensity. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythmic clatter of wheels on track and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. Snow streaked past outside, blurring the world into white and black. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Curiosity crept past her fear. Who was he to dress like that and ride coach? Why had he not recoiled when she invaded his space? Why did his eyes hold such deep, unspoken pain? Finally, unable to bear the quiet, she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for the coat and for not being angry." The words felt pitifully small. She hated how weak she sounded, how every sentence revealed the depth of her exhaustion and shame. Alex's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Anger at himself, at the world that had brought her this low, burned in his veins. "No one should have to apologize for being tired," he said. His gaze held hers for a moment too long, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a dizzying warmth that terrified her as much as it confused her. Outside, unseen in the darkness, Alex's phone vibrated once in his pocket, a coded message from his driver. Earlier that evening, before boarding, there had been a tense confrontation on Michigan Avenue. A rival crew from the south side had pushed into Moretti territory, testing boundaries. Alex had met them himself, standing beneath the holiday lights of the Magnificent Mile while his men flanked him. Words had been exchanged, sharp, low, laced with threat. No shots fired, but the promise of violence hung heavy in the cold air. He had stared down their leader until the man backed away, but the encounter left a bitter taste. Another reminder of the empire he could never fully escape. Now, sitting beside this fragile woman who had no idea the danger that shadowed him, remorse twisted deeper. How many more nights would he drag innocent people into his storms? Yet the thought of letting her face her own storms alone was unbearable. Sarah shifted slightly, the coat's warmth seeping into her bones for the first time in months. Tears pricked her eyes, tears of exhaustion, of humiliation, of a gratitude so profound it hurt. She blinked them back fiercely. "I'm Sarah," she offered quietly, because silence felt rude after his kindness. "Alex," he replied. Just that. No last name, no explanation. Another stretch of quiet. Then, softly, as if the words were being pulled from her against her will, Sarah began to speak. About her mother dying in Springfield, about Ethan waiting in Chicago with a neighbor she could barely afford to pay, about the medical bills that arrived like clockwork, each one a fresh wound. Her voice cracked on her son's name, and she pressed her lips together to stop the sob that threatened. Alex listened without interruption. Every word carved itself into him. The unfairness of it, the sheer, brutal unfairness, ignited a fury he rarely allowed himself to feel. He wanted to fix it all, wanted to carry her burdens on shoulders broad enough to bear them. The love that had sparked so suddenly now burned with violent intensity, tearing at the walls he had built around his heart for years. When she finished, voice fading into silence, he spoke at last. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. The words carried weight, as though he had seen battles she could not imagine. Sarah looked at him then, really looked, and for one suspended moment, the train, the cold, the grief, all of it fell away. There was only the steady green of his eyes and the impossible warmth of his coat around her shoulders. Confusion swirled with something deeper, something that made her heart ache in a way it had not in years. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside the quiet car, two broken souls sat side by side. One cloaked in shadows and power, the other in poverty and quiet courage, and neither yet understood how completely the other would change their life. The train cut southward through the snow-swept fields of Illinois, the windows frosting at the edges as the December night deepened. Inside the quiet car, time seemed to slow, the outside world reduced to blurred white streaks and the occasional distant glow of a farmhouse light. Sarah Jennings sat wrapped in the stranger's cashmere overcoat, its warmth a foreign luxury against her thin, chilled body. She had not removed it, could not bring herself to, even though every second she wore it deepened the humiliating awareness of how far she had fallen. The coat smelled faintly of cedar and something expensively clean, a scent that belonged to a life she could scarcely imagine. Alex Moretti watched her from the corner of his eye, careful not to stare. The conflict inside him had become a living thing, tearing at his chest with claws he had never felt before. He was a man who commanded fear in boardrooms and back alleys alike, whose word could shift millions or silence threats with a single phone call. Yet this woman, this exhausted, malnourished nurse with hollow cheeks and trembling hands, had undone him completely in the space of an hour. The love that had ignited when her head first rested on his shoulder now burned with a fierce, almost violent intensity. It frightened him more than any rival ever had. He, who had long ago buried softness beneath layers of control, felt it rising like a tide he could not hold back. Remorse gnawed deeper. How many nights had he spent in heated penthouses, while women like Sarah shivered in drafty apartments? How many times had he ordered protection money collected from struggling shop owners who could barely feed their families? The guilt was a blade twisting slowly, and still the need to shield her, to lift every burden from her narrow shoulders, consumed him. Sarah's fingers worried the edge of the coat sleeve. Silence stretched, heavy and charged. She felt his gaze occasionally, soft but unwavering, and it made her heart stutter with confusion and fear. No one had looked at her with such quiet intensity in years, not since before Ethan's illness, before the bills, before her ex vanished and left her to drown alone. She wanted to speak, to fill the quiet with polite gratitude and retreat behind safe walls, but the words tangled in her throat. Finally, the train rocked gently over a switch, and Sarah swayed. Without thinking, Alex reached out, his hand steadying her elbow. The contact was brief, warm, and deliberate. Electricity shot through her, dizzying and disorienting. She pulled back as if burned, numbness spreading through her limbs. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, voice soft and timid. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't," he said quietly. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath she heard something raw. The train moved, that's all. Another silence. Outside, snow pelted the windows harder. Sarah's thoughts spiraled. Her mother was dying alone in a Springfield hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Ethan was back in Chicago with a neighbor who charged $20 an hour Sarah did not have. The electricity bill was 3 weeks overdue. Eviction papers had arrived yesterday. She had hidden them under the mattress so Ethan would not see. Tears pressed hot behind her eyes. Life had become a series of unfair, crushing blows, one after another, without mercy. She did not notice the tears spilling over until one slipped down her cheek. Hastily, she wiped it away, mortified. "I'm sorry," she murmured yet again, hating how small she sounded. Alex's jaw tightened. The sight of her tears struck him like a physical blow. Inside, torment raged. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to promise her the world on a silver platter, to erase every injustice she had endured. But he knew his world was poison, and still the love burned brighter. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, voice rougher now. "Nothing." Sarah looked at him then, really looked. His green eyes held storms she could not name, pain, regret, something fiercely protective. Curiosity overrode her fear for a moment. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked, voice barely audible. "You don't know me." Alex exhaled slowly. The question cut deep. "Because I recognize suffering when I see it," he thought. "Because I've caused too much of it. Because the moment you leaned on me, something in me broke open and I can't close it again." "I know enough," he said instead. "You're carrying more than anyone should have to." The honesty in his tone startled her. Fresh tears welled. She tried to swallow them, but they fell anyway. "My mom," she began, then stopped, throat closing. "Tell me," he encouraged softly. Not a command, but an invitation. And somehow, in the dim light of the quiet car, Sarah did. Words tumbled out in a broken whisper about her mother's long battle with cancer, about missing visits because bus tickets cost money she did not have, about watching the strongest woman she knew waste away. About Ethan's rare illness, the experimental treatments insurance denied, the nights she worked double shifts only to come home and find fever in his small body again. About the food pantry lines, the humiliation of government assistance forms, the way landlords looked at her like she was already gone. With every confession, her voice grew shakier. The unfairness of it all rose like bile, the healthy abandoning the sick, the system crushing the poor, the endless grinding loneliness. She spoke of sleeping in her coat inside the apartment because heat was a luxury, of skipping meals so Ethan could have protein, of crying in the hospital bathroom where no one could hear. Alex listened without interruption. Each word was a lash across his soul. Remorse and fury intertwined until he could barely breathe. He had dined in private clubs while this woman starved herself for her child. He had driven past food pantries in armored SUVs. The violent conflict inside him intensified. He wanted to raise every injustice that had touched her, yet knew his own hands were not clean. When she fell silent, spent and trembling, he spoke at last. "You're not alone tonight," he said quietly. The words carried weight, promise, possession. Sarah's heart stuttered. Confusion and fear warred with a dangerous warmth. No one had ever spoken to her like that, as if she mattered beyond obligation. Outside, unseen, Alex's phone vibrated twice. Messages from his capo. The Southside crew had been spotted again near one of his warehouses in Bridgeport. Earlier that evening, before boarding the train, Alex had handled a tense standoff himself. He had stepped out of his black Escalade under the sodium glow of streetlights, flanked by 2 silent lieutenants. The rival enforcers, 6 of them, had waited in shadowed doorways. Words had been sharp, threats veiled, but clear. Alex had stared down their leader until the man shifted uncomfortably, then backed away with muttered promises of future discussion. No shots, no blood, but the air had crackled with impending storm. Now, sitting beside Sarah, that world felt both impossibly close and impossibly far. Guilt surged anew. How could he offer her safety when danger followed him like a shadow? The train lurched suddenly over uneven track, a sharp jolt that rocked the car. Sarah gasped, thrown sideways. Instinctively, Alex wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her against his chest. For a heartbeat, she was pressed against him, warm, solid, safe. His heartbeat thundered beneath her ear. The scent of cedar enveloped her again. Time suspended. Sarah froze, dizziness returning in a rush. Shock and something deeper, something that terrified her, flooded her veins. She should pull away. Instead, for one stolen moment, she let herself lean into the strength she had not felt in years. Alex's arm tightened fractionally. The feel of her slight frame against him nearly undid him. Love, fierce and consuming, roared through every barrier. He would burn cities to keep her safe. The realization shook him to his core. Slowly, carefully, he released her. Sarah sat back, face flushed, heart pounding. Confusion numbed her thoughts. Fear whispered that this was too much, too sudden. Yet the warmth lingered, treacherous and sweet. They did not speak again for a long while. Snow fell thicker outside, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, 2 hearts beat in unsteady rhythm, one torn by guilt and impossible love, the other torn by poverty and the first glimmer of hope in years. Neither noticed the miles slipping away, bringing Springfield closer. Neither dared acknowledge how completely the night had already changed them. The train slowed with a long, mournful sigh as it pulled into Springfield's small station, the brakes hissing against the snow-dusted rails. Dawn was still hours away, and the platform lights cast pale halos through the falling flakes. Sarah Jennings stirred from the half-doze she had fallen into again, the stranger's cashmere coat still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The warmth had lulled her into a fragile sense of safety she knew could not last. Reality returned like a cold slap, her mother, the hospital, the crushing weight of everything waiting beyond these doors. She sat up slowly, dizziness swirling as blood rushed to her head. Her body, thin and weakened by months of near starvation, protested every movement. She slipped the coat from her shoulders and folded it with careful, trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, voice soft and timid, holding it out to him. "For everything." Alex Moretti took the coat but did not put it on. His green eyes held hers in the dim light, and the storm inside him raged fiercer than before. The confessions she had poured out in the dark had carved themselves into his soul. Every detail, her son's illness, the skipped meals, the eviction notice she had mentioned in a broken whisper, fed the violent remorse tearing at his heart. He had spent years amassing wealth that could have prevented 1,000 such stories, yet he had never truly seen one up close until tonight. The love that had ignited hours ago now burned with a desperate, all-consuming intensity. He wanted to shield her from every cruelty the world had shown her. He wanted to be the reason she never shivered again. The conflict was excruciating. He was the last man on earth who deserved to feel this way about someone so purely good. "Keep it," he said quietly. "You need it more than I do." Sarah shook her head, fear and guarded suspicion flickering in her eyes. "I can't, it's too much." Her voice cracked on the last word. Accepting charity from strangers had become a humiliating necessity. Food pantry lines, church donations, the neighbor who sometimes watched Ethan for half price out of pity. But this coat represented a different scale entirely. It was the kind of luxury she had only seen in magazines. Alex did not argue. He simply stood as the train came to a full stop, slipping the coat over his arm. Passengers began gathering bags, shuffling toward the doors. Sarah rose unsteadily, clutching her small backpack. Her legs felt numb, balance uncertain after hours of cramped sitting and emotional exhaustion. Outside, the cold hit like a wall. Snow swirled under the platform lights, and the wind cut straight through her patched bear's jacket. She shivered violently, teeth chattering before she could stop them. Tears pricked again, tears of frustration, of the unfairness that even this short walk to find a cab or bus would sap strength she could not spare. Alex saw it all. The remorse inside him twisted sharper. He had left his heated Suburban waiting with his driver precisely because he had intended to travel discreetly. But now the sight of her trembling in the freezing night was unbearable. "My car is here," he said, voice low but firm. "Let my driver take you to the hospital." Sarah froze on the platform steps, snowflakes catching in her lashes. Shock and confusion numbed her thoughts. I can't ask you to do that," she murmured, polite and timid. Horror crept in. Strangers with expensive cars did not offer rides to women like her without expecting something in return. Yet his eyes held no calculation, only that same deep, turbulent intensity. "You're not asking," Alex replied. "I'm offering." Inside, the conflict raged. He knew the danger of drawing her closer. His world was a minefield. But letting her walk alone into the storm felt like a betrayal of the vow already forming in his heart. Sarah's mind spun. The hospital was miles away. A cab would cost money she barely had. The late-night bus would take hours she could not spare if her mother truly had only tonight. Dizziness returned, the cold seeping into her bones. Tears froze on her cheeks. Before she could refuse again, Alex gently took her elbow, guiding her down the steps with steady strength. A black Suburban idled at the curb, exhaust curling in the frigid air. The driver, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark coat, stepped out immediately and opened the rear door without a word. Sarah hesitated one last moment, heart pounding with fear and desperate gratitude. Then, powerless against the cold and the ticking clock, she climbed in. The interior was warm, leather seats heated, the faint scent of luxury that made her feel small and out of place. Alex slid in beside her, the door closing with a solid, expensive thud. The driver pulled away smoothly, tires crunching over fresh snow. Silence filled the car, thick and charged. Sarah stared out the window, watching streetlights blur past. Her inner world tore apart, gratitude warring with suspicion, exhaustion with anxiety. This man, Alex, had given her warmth, listened to her pain, now offered safety she could never repay. It felt like a dream too kind to be real, and dreams like this always shattered. Alex sat motionless, hands clasped in his lap. His phone vibrated twice, updates from Chicago. Earlier that evening, before boarding the train, the tension with the Southside crew had escalated again. His men had intercepted 2 of their runners near his warehouse on Halstead. The confrontation had unfolded under flickering streetlights. Alex stepping from his vehicle, coat open despite the cold, staring down the rivals until they retreated with muttered threats. No blood shed, but the message had been clear. Push further, and consequences would follow. Now, sitting inches from Sarah, that world felt both dangerously close and impossibly distant. Guilt surged. How could he bring her anywhere near it? Yet the love burning in his chest demanded he protect her at any cost. The hospital appeared ahead, lit windows glowing through the snow. Sarah's breath caught. Reality crashed back. Her mother, fragile and fading. Fresh tears welled. The Suburban pulled under the porte-cochere. The driver opened her door. Sarah turned to Alex, voice trembling. "Thank you. Truly. I don't know how to repay." "You don't," he interrupted gently. He reached into his coat and pulled out a simple white card, thick stock, elegant lettering. Alex Moretti, followed by a private phone number. No title, no company. "If you need anything at all, call." Sarah took the card with numb fingers. Shock and deep disorientation washed over her. Men like him did not give personal numbers to women like her. She stepped out into the cold again, backpack clutched tight. The driver closed the door. As the Suburban pulled away, Sarah stood beneath the hospital lights, snow falling softly around her. Tears streamed freely now. Tears for her mother, for Ethan waiting in Chicago, for the humiliating depth of her poverty, and for the impossible kindness of a stranger whose coat still carried his warmth in her memory. Inside the retreating vehicle, Alex watched her silhouette disappear. The violent inner conflict reached a peak. Love, fierce and irrevocable, had taken root. He would move heaven and earth to keep her safe, even if it meant confronting every shadow in his own empire. He did not yet know how completely their paths had already intertwined years ago, but the pull was undeniable. The first act of salvation had begun, and neither of them would ever be the same. Sarah Jennings stepped through the automatic doors of the Springfield Hospital, the antiseptic smell hitting her like a wave. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the tired faces in the waiting area. Her legs felt unsteady, the long night on the train and the emotional storm inside her combining into a deep, throbbing exhaustion. Snow melted from her worn sneakers, leaving wet prints on the linoleum floor. She clutched her backpack tighter, the business card from Alex burning a hole in her pocket like an ember she could not explain. Aunt Mary rose from a plastic chair near the nurse's station, face lined with grief and fatigue. When she saw Sarah, relief flooded her eyes, and she pulled her into a tight embrace. Sarah clung back, tears finally breaking free. "How is she?" she whispered, voice trembling. Mary exhaled shakily. "Holding on. The doctor said the night was rough, but she's stabilized. Come." They walked the quiet corridors, past beeping monitors and hushed voices. Every step twisted Sarah's stomach tighter. Her mother, once the unbreakable center of her world, now lay fragile in a narrow bed, machines breathing for her when her body could not. Sarah took her mother's thin hand, the skin paper-like, and sat beside her. "Mom, I'm here," she said softly, throat raw. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then clearing with recognition. A weak smile curved her lips. "My girl, you came." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her chest. They sat in silence for hours, the only sounds the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the occasional murmur of nurses outside. Sarah's thoughts drifted back to the train, to Alex's steady presence, to the impossible warmth of his coat. Confusion and guilt warred within her. How could she feel anything but grief right now? Yet the memory lingered, a dangerous flicker of comfort in the cold darkness of her life. Days blurred into a vigil. Sarah slept in the chair when she could, ate vending machine crackers when hunger became unbearable, and called the neighbor in Chicago twice a day to check on Ethan. Each call brought fresh pain, his small voice asking when Mommy was coming home, the neighbor's gentle reminders about the extra hours adding up. The medical bills for her mother arrived like clockwork, slipped under the door by billing staff who avoided eye contact. Sarah stared at the numbers, dizziness washing over her. She had nothing left to give. On the third night, as snow tapped softly against the window, her mother stirred. "Sarah," she whispered, voice frail, "there's something I need to tell you." Sarah leaned closer, heart pounding with fresh fear. "Years ago, when you were still a new nurse in the ER, a young man came in, multiple gunshot wounds, bad shape. The charge nurse that night, me, I saw the chart. Police wanted to question him, but you fought for hours to save him, against protocol. You stabilized him, then made sure his name never went on record. You protected him." Sarah frowned, memory tugging dimly. She had been 24, idealistic, working brutal shifts. There had been nights blurred together, trauma after trauma. One stood out vaguely, a fair-skinned man in his late 20s, brought in under cover of darkness, wounds precise and deliberate. She had worked tirelessly, intuition telling her he was more than a random victim. When he stabilized, she had quietly omitted details that would have brought police swarming. It had felt right at the time, saving a life, no questions. "I never knew his name," Sarah murmured. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "He found out later, sent flowers to the hospital anonymously, a card that just said, 'Thank you for my life.' I kept it all these years." She reached weakly for the bedside drawer where a faded envelope lay. Inside, a simple card, no signature, only those words. Sarah stared, shock numbing her limbs. The pieces clicked slowly. Alex's age, his fair skin, the haunted depth in his green eyes. Disorientation crashed over her like a wave. The man on the train, the one who had listened to her pain, draped his coat over her, offered his car, was the same man she had saved anonymously all those years ago. Tears spilled down her cheeks. The unfairness of fate tore at her heart. She had fought to save a stranger, never expecting anything in return, and now, when her own world crumbled, he had appeared like a guardian she did not deserve. Yet suspicion lingered. Why had he not told her? What kind of man needed anonymity after a shooting? Across the state, in Chicago, Alex Moretti stood on the balcony of his Gold Coast penthouse, city lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. The wind whipped his open shirt, but he welcomed the cold. Sleep had evaded him since the train. Sarah's face haunted every quiet moment, her hollow cheeks, her broken whispers, the way she had leaned into him for that single heartbeat. The love that had ignited so suddenly now consumed him entirely. It was fierce, irrational, and terrifying. He, who had built walls of steel around his heart, felt them crumbling. Remorse gnawed relentlessly. He had spent years repaying the debt of his survival with power and isolation, never imagining the nurse who saved him would one day need saving herself. His phone buzzed. Updates from his lieutenants. The Southside crew had struck again, this time a bold drive-by intimidation near one of his legitimate restaurants in River North. No shots fired, but windows shattered, patrons terrified. Alex had arrived himself, stepping from his Escalade into the flashing police lights, his presence alone enough to scatter the perpetrators. He had stared down their retreating taillights, voice calm as he assured frightened staff that protection would tighten. Inside, fury and guilt intertwined. He protected his empire with an iron hand, yet innocence always paid the price. Now, thinking of Sarah in that hospital room, the conflict tore deeper. How could he pull her closer when danger circled like wolves? Yet letting her face her burdens alone was unthinkable. He pulled out his phone and texted the number he had memorized. "Just checking in. How is your mother?" Minutes stretched. Then her reply came. "Stable for now. Thank you again. For everything." Alex stared at the screen, heart clenching. He typed back, "I meant what I said. Anything you need." In the hospital room, Sarah read the messages, fresh tears falling. The card from years ago lay on the blanket. Shock and deep disorientation numbed her. The man she had saved was now saving her, or trying to. Gratitude and fear collided violently. She was poor, powerless, drowning, yet suddenly seen, protected, by the one person whose life she had once held in her hands. Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "Fate, baby girl. Sometimes it circles back." Sarah nodded, throat too tight for words. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in quiet white. Inside, two lives, once briefly intertwined in blood and desperation, were binding together again, stronger and far more dangerous than either could yet comprehend. The debt of a life was being repaid, but at what cost? Sarah Jennings returned to Chicago on a gray afternoon in late December, the Amtrak pulling into Union Station under a sky heavy with unshed snow. Her mother had slipped away peacefully 2 nights earlier, holding Sarah's hand until the end. The funeral had been small, paid for with a church donation and Aunt Mary's savings. Another humiliation Sarah carried like a stone in her chest. Now, back in the city, the weight of survival pressed harder than ever. Ethan's next treatment loomed, the bills already stacking higher, and the eviction notice deadline ticked closer. She stepped off the train into the biting wind, her patched bear's jacket doing little against the cold. The cashmere coat Alex had draped over her that night remained folded in her backpack. She had not worn it since, afraid to damage something so fine, afraid to accept more than she already had. Her body ached with exhaustion and grief, thin frame shivering as she navigated the crowded station. Dizziness came in waves. She had eaten almost nothing in days. Outside, she hesitated. A cab was impossible, too expensive. The bus would take hours. Tears pricked her eyes at the unfairness. Her mother gone, Ethan waiting, and no strength left to carry her home. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from an unknown number. "Welcome back to Chicago. My driver is outside if you need a ride. Alex." Sarah stared at the screen, heart stuttering. Shock and confusion numbed her fingers. How did he know she was arriving now? Fear crept in. Had he been watching? Yet, beneath it, a treacherous warmth bloomed. She looked up and saw the familiar black Suburban idling at the curb, the same driver standing beside it. Powerless against the cold and her own exhaustion, she walked toward it. The driver opened the door without a word. Sarah slid inside, sinking into the heated leather. "Thank you," she murmured softly, voice timid. The drive to Logan Square passed in silence. Sarah stared out at familiar streets, pawn shops, check-cashing places, boarded windows, reminders of the world she could not escape. When the Suburban stopped outside her run-down apartment building, shame burned her cheeks. Graffiti marked the entrance, trash overflowed the bins, and the hallway light flickered weakly. She thanked the driver again and climbed the stairs slowly, legs trembling. Inside the apartment, Ethan greeted her with a fierce hug, his small face pale but smiling. The neighbor handed over the bill for watching him, money Sarah did not have until next week's paycheck. She paid with the last of her cash, stomach twisting as the door closed. That night, after Ethan slept, Sarah sat at the kitchen table under a single bulb, bills spread before her like accusations. The electricity notice threatened disconnection in 5 days. Ethan's medication refill was due, rent overdue. Tears fell silently. The poverty was a living thing, humiliating and relentless. Nights shivering under thin blankets, meals of ramen and hope, the constant fear of losing everything. Her phone buzzed again. "Alex, how are you holding up?" Sarah hesitated, fingers hovering. Then, against every guarded instinct, she typed, "Not well. Mom passed. Back home now. Thank you for the ride." His reply came instantly. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Truly. Let me help." She stared at the words, heart pounding with confusion and fear. Help how? She was a stranger to him. Or was she? The life debt revelation still spun in her mind, disorienting and overwhelming. The next morning, another text. "Meet me for coffee? Just to talk. I'll send the car." Sarah should have refused. Pride, suspicion, grief, all screamed no. But Ethan coughed in the next room, a reminder of treatments she could not afford alone. Curiosity and desperation won. She agreed. An hour later, the Suburban delivered her to a quiet cafe in River North, far from her neighborhood. Warm lights, soft jazz, the scent of fresh espresso. Another world. Alex waited at a corner table, impeccably dressed, green eyes rising to meet hers as she entered. He stood, pulling out her chair with quiet courtesy. Sarah sat, feeling small and out of place in her worn sweater. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. His voice carried genuine sorrow. "I was sorry to hear about your mother." She nodded, throat tight. It was peaceful at the end. Tears threatened again. She blinked them back. They ordered coffee for her, black, espresso for him. When it arrived, Alex leaned forward slightly. "I need to tell you something." Sarah's heart stuttered. Fear and curiosity mingled. "I recognized you on the train," he said quietly. "Years ago, in the ER, you saved my life. I never forgot the nurse who fought for me when no one else would. I looked for you afterward, but you'd protected my privacy so well, even I couldn't find you." Shock crashed over Sarah like ice water. Dizziness returned. She gripped the table edge. You're the man from that night?" Alex nodded. The remorse in his eyes was raw. "I've carried that debt every day since, and then fate put you beside me when you needed help most." His voice lowered. "Let me repay it, Sarah. Ethan's treatment, the experimental protocol that insurance denies, I've already covered it. The best specialists, the private hospital. It starts next week." Sarah stared, world tilting. Numbness spread through her limbs. "You... what?" Her voice was barely a whisper, timid and disbelieving. "And a new position," he continued gently. "Day shifts at a top clinic I support. Better pay, benefits. You deserve stability." Tears spilled over. The offer was everything she had prayed for in silent, desperate moments. Yet it came from a man whose world she sensed was shadowed. Confusion tore at her heart. Gratitude warred with fear. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't owe me this much." Alex's jaw tightened. Inside, torment raged. The love burning in him demanded he give her the world, yet guilt screamed he would only taint it. "Because you gave me my life," he said. "And because," he paused, eyes fierce with unspoken intensity, "because no one should suffer the way you have." Sarah's inner world fractured. Shock, gratitude, terror. Someone saw her pain, truly saw it, and wanted to end it. Yet suspicion lingered. What price would come later? Across the city, Alex's phone vibrated silently, updates on escalating tension. That morning, he had confronted rivals again near his Gold Coast properties. A bold crew had parked outside one of his legitimate businesses, engines idling, stares challenging. Alex had walked out alone, coat open against the wind, meeting their leader eye to eye in the middle of the street. Words low and clipped, boundaries redrawn without a hand raised. They had driven off, but the threat lingered. Now, watching Sarah's tears, the conflict inside him peaked. His empire brought danger. His love demanded he shield her from it. The violence of his emotions, remorse, passion, protectiveness, threatened to consume him. Sarah wiped her eyes, voice trembling. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, "of needing this, of what it means." Alex reached across the table, not touching her, but close enough she felt his warmth. "You don't owe me anything else," he said fiercely. "Ever. This is because you deserve better. Accept it for Ethan, for yourself." Silence stretched, heavy with possibility. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw truth, and something deeper, burning brighter than gratitude. Her heart tore wider. Poor, powerless, suddenly offered salvation by the man whose life she had once saved. Slowly, tears streaming, she nodded. "Okay." Relief and love surged through Alex so powerfully his hand trembled. The offer was made. The debt began to be repaid, but both knew, in the quiet of that cafe, something far greater had begun. Sarah Jennings began her first day at the new clinic in early January, the Chicago wind still sharp enough to cut through any resolve. The private hospital on the near north side was a world apart from the chaotic halls of Cook County. Quiet corridors, soft lighting, state-of-the-art equipment, and patients who arrived in luxury cars rather than ambulances. Her new scrubs fit properly, the fabric crisp and new, and the paycheck promised at the end of the month would cover rent, utilities, and Ethan's medication with money left over for groceries that were not marked down or expired. Yet every moment felt borrowed, fragile, as though the ground might open beneath her at any second. She moved through her shifts with careful precision, afraid to touch anything too firmly, afraid someone would realize she did not belong. The other nurses were kind but curious, their glances lingering on the thin woman with hollow cheeks and shadows under her eyes. Sarah smiled politely, voice soft and timid, answering questions with as few words as possible. Ethan's treatment had begun the previous week. The specialist, a gentle, older doctor with a reassuring manner, had explained the protocol in detail, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Her little boy's color improved almost immediately, his energy returning in small, precious bursts. She watched him laugh at cartoons one evening and felt tears rise, tears of gratitude so fierce they frightened her. Gratitude directed at Alex Moretti. He had not pushed for contact after the cafe meeting, only quiet texts checking on Ethan's progress and her adjustment to the new job. Each message arrived like a lifeline, yet deepened the turmoil inside her. She was poor, powerless, accustomed to loss. How could she accept salvation from a man whose very name made people lower their voices? The life debt bound them, but something deeper pulled at her heart, something she dared not name. Alex, meanwhile, waged war on two fronts. The outer war grew bolder. The South Side crew, emboldened by winter desperation, tested boundaries nightly. One evening, Alex received word that two of their enforcers had been spotted outside the clinic where Sarah now worked, idling across the street, watching. He arrived within minutes, stepping from his Escalade into the sodium glow of streetlights. His men flanked him discreetly. The rivals sat in a dark sedan, engines running. Alex walked straight to the driver's window, coat open despite the cold, green eyes unblinking. Words were exchanged, low, clipped, laced with warning. The car pulled away slowly, but the message had been delivered on both sides. No blood, but the air crackled with promise of worse to come. The inner war was far more brutal. Every report of Ethan's improvement, every quiet "thank you" text from Sarah, fed the fire consuming Alex's heart. Love, raw, passionate, all-consuming, had taken complete possession. It terrified him. He had built an empire on control, on distance. Yet this slight woman with her quiet courage and unbearable suffering had shattered every defense. Remorse tore at him nightly. He had profited from a city that crushed people like her, had ordered actions that indirectly deepened the poverty she endured. Guilt and desire intertwined until he could barely breathe. And now, danger circled her because of him. He tightened security without telling her, discreet shadows trailing her bus route, watching Ethan's school drop-off. When anonymous envelopes appeared in her mailbox, grainy photos of Ethan playing in the apartment courtyard, no note, only implication, Alex's blood ran cold. Someone inside or allied with the rivals had connected Sarah to him. She was being marked as leverage. Sarah discovered the first envelope one evening after a late shift. She stood in the flickering hallway light, fingers trembling as she pulled out the photos. Horror flooded her, dizziness crashing in a sickening wave. Her knees buckled. She slid down the wall, numbness spreading through her limbs. Ethan, her precious, fragile boy, watched. The violation was unbearable. Tears came hard and silent. Who would do this? Why? She did not call the police. Instinct told her this was beyond them. Instead, hands shaking, she dialed the only number that felt like safety. Alex answered on the first ring. Sarah? Her voice broke. Someone... Photos of Ethan in my mailbox. A beat of silence, then his tone shifted. Low, lethal calm. Stay inside. Lock the door. I'm coming. He arrived 20 minutes later, the Suburban pulling up quietly. Sarah opened the door, face pale, eyes swollen. Alex stepped inside, filling the small space with his presence. He took the envelope gently, jaw clenching as he studied the images. Fury and guilt warred in his eyes. I'm moving protection onto you both, he said quietly. Discreet. You won't see them, but they'll be there. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. This is because of me accepting your help, isn't it? Her voice was small, timid, laced with fear. Your world, it's touching us now. Alex's heart tore. He wanted to pull her close, to promise the earth, but guilt held him back. It's because of me, he admitted roughly. Not you, never you. Inside, torment raged. He would end this threat, whatever the cost, but the cost might be her trust. Sarah looked up at him, tears spilling again. Confusion, fear, and something warmer warred within her. I'm scared, she whispered, but thank you for coming. He met her gaze, the love in his eyes burning bright and fierce. I will always come, he said, voice low with promise. Always. Silence stretched, heavy and charged. Outside, snow began to fall again, muffling the city sounds. Inside the tiny apartment, two souls stood on the edge of something vast and irrevocable. One cloaked in power and shadows, the other in poverty and quiet strength. The hidden threat had revealed itself. Protection tightened. But both knew the storm was only beginning, and the cost of love in Alex Moretti's world could be higher than either dared imagine. The threats did not stop. By mid-January, the anonymous envelopes had become a cruel routine. Photos of Ethan at the park, at school, even one taken through the apartment window as Sarah tucked him into bed. Each arrival struck Sarah like a physical blow. She stopped sleeping, her already thin frame growing frailer, eyes ringed with exhaustion that no amount of concealer could hide. The new job's daylight hours helped, but nights were a torment of listening for footsteps in the hall, jumping at every creak of the old building. Poverty's old humiliations, scraping for bus fare, rationing food, now mingled with a new terror, someone watching her son because of her connection to Alex Moretti. Sarah's inner world fractured further. Gratitude for Ethan's improving health warred with paralyzing fear. She had accepted Alex's help to save her child, yet it had painted a target on them both. Confusion tore at her. Why did danger follow kindness? Why did the man who had lifted her from despair now bring shadows? Alex felt every threat like a knife to his own flesh. The love that had begun as a spark on that train now raged uncontrolled, fierce, and possessive. He could not eat, could not rest, knowing she suffered because of him. Remorse gnawed relentlessly. He had vowed to protect her, yet his world bled into hers like ink in water. Guilt and desire collided nightly. He wanted to keep her at arm's length for her safety, yet the thought of distance was unbearable. He tightened security again, unseen guardians at every corner of her life. When a suspicious van lingered too long outside Ethan's school, Alex arrived himself. He stepped from the Escalade in the winter dusk, coat unbuttoned, flanked by two silent lieutenants. The van's driver met his gaze through the windshield. Alex walked forward slowly, eyes locked, until the engine roared and the vehicle sped away. No words, no hands raised, but the message was clear. Later that night, his men traced the plates. The warning was delivered discreetly to the Southside leadership. Boundaries held, for now. One late January evening, after another envelope appeared, this one with a photo of Sarah leaving the clinic, a winter storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. Wind howled through Chicago's streets, snow slashing sideways. Sarah put Ethan to bed early, kissing his forehead as he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, the new treatment working miracles on his small body. She stood at the window, watching the blizzard rage, tears silent on her cheeks. The unfairness crushed her, her son healing, yet terror replacing hunger as their nightly companion. Her phone buzzed. "Alex, are you safe? Storm's bad." She typed back with trembling fingers, "Yes, another photo today." His reply was immediate, "I'm outside." Sarah's heart lurched. She peered through the blinds, the black Suburban idled at the curb, wipers battling the snow. Shock and fear mingled with something warmer. She should tell him to leave. It was late, dangerous. Instead, she buzzed him up. Alex entered her apartment, soaked from the short walk, snow melting from his dark hair. The small space seemed to shrink around his presence. Broad shoulders, expensive coat now draped over his arm, green eyes burning with barely restrained emotion. He set a bag on the counter. Groceries, real food, fresh fruit, steak, milk that was not powdered. "I was nearby," he said quietly. It was a lie. He had driven through the storm the moment she mentioned the photo. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, voice soft and timid. "You shouldn't have come in this weather. I needed to know you were safe." His tone was rough, edged with the war inside him. Silence stretched, thick with snow-muffled quiet. Sarah's eyes filled again. "They won't stop, will they?" she whispered. "Because of me, because I let you help." Alex's jaw clenched. Guilt and fury collided. "Because of me," he corrected fiercely. "Never you." He stepped closer, close enough she felt his warmth against the chill seeping through the old windows. "I will end this, Sarah. I swear it." She looked up at him, tears spilling. Confusion, fear, gratitude all crashed together. "I don't know how to live like this," she admitted brokenly. Waiting for the next photo, wondering if Ethan... Her voice shattered. Without thinking, Alex reached for her, hands gentle on her arms. "You're not alone anymore." The words undid her. Years of carrying everything, poverty, illness, grief, alone. Suddenly, strong arms pulled her close. Sarah's resistance crumbled. She pressed her face to his chest, sobs muffled against his shirt. He held her tightly, one hand cradling her head, the other steady on her back. The storm raged outside, but inside something shifted irrevocably. Alex's heart thundered. The feel of her slight frame against him, fragile yet unbreakable, ignited the love he had fought to contain. It surged, passionate and consuming, tearing away every barrier. Remorse screamed that he would only hurt her more, yet the need to protect, to claim, to love overpowered everything. Sarah felt it too, the safety, the strength, the impossible warmth of being held when she had forgotten what it felt like. Shock gave way to a rush of emotions so intense it frightened her. She tilted her face up, eyes searching his. Their gazes locked, time suspended. Alex's hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. The air crackled. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head. Sarah did not pull away. The kiss was not gentle. It was years of restraint shattering, his, hers. Passion exploded, fierce and desperate. His mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole her breath, her hands clutching his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. He backed her gently against the door, bodies pressing close, the storm outside forgotten. Heat built, intense and overwhelming, every touch speaking what words could not. I see you. I need you. You are safe with me. When they broke apart, foreheads resting together, both trembled. Sarah's lips tingled, heart racing with shock and longing. Alex's eyes burned darker, love laid bare. I shouldn't have, he began roughly, guilt rising again. Don't, she whispered, voice trembling but sure. Don't stop. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, passion tempered with reverence. Clothes stayed on, boundaries held by the thinnest thread of control, but the fire between them raged unchecked. Hands traced, breaths mingled, promises made without words. Later, wrapped in his arms on the threadbare couch, snow still falling outside, Sarah felt the violent tear in her heart begin to mend. Poverty's humiliations, fear's grip. Tonight they receded before the force of being wanted, protected, loved. Alex held her close, inner conflict raging even as joy flooded him. He would burn every threat to ash to keep this. The passion that had ignited was no fleeting spark. It was a blaze that would consume them both. Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, something new and fierce was born. February arrived with a cruel thaw, snow melting into slush that soaked through Sarah Jennings's worn shoes as she hurried between the clinic and home. Ethan's improvement continued, a quiet miracle that brought tears of joy each time he ran to greet her without tiring. The new apartment Alex had quietly arranged, still modest but safe, warm, with heat that never failed, was a luxury she still could not believe. Fresh groceries filled the refrigerator. Ethan's laughter echoed off walls that no longer leaked cold wind. Yet peace felt borrowed, fragile as thin ice. The threats had quieted after the storm-lit kiss, but Sarah's fear lingered like a shadow. She caught herself scanning streets for unfamiliar cars, jumping at sudden noises. The passion that had ignited between her and Alex now burned steady and fierce. Late-night phone calls that stretched into dawn, stolen dinners when Ethan slept at a friend's, kisses that left her breathless and trembling. Each touch deepened the impossible. A poor, broken woman loved with an intensity that both healed and terrified her. Alex Moretti lived in a storm of his own making. The love for Sarah consumed him utterly, passionate, possessive, redemptive. It was the one pure thing in a life stained by choices he could never undo. Yet every moment with her sharpened the blade of remorse. He saw her flinch at loud voices, noticed how she still rationed food out of habit, and the guilt tore him apart. His empire had thrived while she starved. His protection now endangered her. The violent conflict inside raged without cease. He would raise anything that threatened her, yet feared his world would ultimately destroy what he loved most. The betrayal struck without warning. Intelligence reached him one gray morning. The leaked photos, the tailing vehicles, all traced not to the Southside rivals, but to someone inside his own family. Marco Moretti, his cousin and trusted capo, jealous of Alex's growing distraction and hungry for control. Marco had fed information to outsiders, hoping to force Alex's hand, or worse, to remove the weakness Sarah represented. Fury and heartbreak collided in Alex's chest. Marco, raised like a brother, groomed for leadership, had chosen ambition over blood. That afternoon, Alex summoned him to a quiet warehouse on the city's edge. Snow fell softly outside as the two men faced each other beneath bare bulbs. Marco arrived confident, smirking, until he saw the cold resolve in Alex's eyes. "You betrayed me," Alex said quietly. "You put her in danger, Ethan." Marco's smirk faltered. "You're soft now, cousin. That nurse has you thinking with your heart instead of your head. The family needs strength, not charity cases." The words struck like blows. Alex stepped closer, voice low and lethal. "She is not a case. She is everything." Inside, torment peaked, love for Sarah clashing with the brutal necessity of his world. He wanted to end Marco here, but blood ties held his hand. Instead, he delivered judgment, banishment. Marco, stripped of rank, assets frozen, ordered to leave Chicago forever. No second chance. The confrontation ended without violence, only the shattering silence of broken loyalty as Marco walked out into the snow, face pale with shock. Alex stood alone afterward, fists clenched, heart tearing. He had spared a traitor for the sake of family memory, yet feared the mercy would cost him later. That same evening, the danger escalated beyond words. Sarah drove home from the clinic along Lakeshore Drive, windshield wipers battling sleet. Ethan was with a sitter, safe, she reminded herself. Suddenly, headlights flared in her rearview mirror, closing fast. A dark SUV swerved aggressively, forcing her toward the guardrail. Panic exploded. She gripped the wheel, heart slamming, dizziness crashing as the car fishtailed on ice. The pursuing vehicle rammed her bumper, once, hard. Her old sedan spun, tires screaming. In that terrifying moment, memories flashed. Poverty's humiliations, her mother's frail hand, Ethan's laughter returning. Tears blurred her vision. The unfairness tore her apart, finally climbing from despair, only to face this. Then, like thunder, black Suburbans appeared, Alex's men, alerted by the tracker he had quietly installed. They boxed in the attacker, forcing it to the shoulder. Sarah's car slid to a stop against the rail, engine stalled, her body shaking with shock and numbness. Doors opened. Alex himself ran to her, wrenching the door and pulling her into his arms on the snowy roadside. "Sarah," he rasped, voice breaking, "I've got you." She clung to him, sobs tearing free. Horror, relief, love, all collided violently. "They tried to," she whispered, voice small and trembling. "I know." His arms tightened, fierce and protective. Guilt ravaged him. He had spared Marco, and this was the price. Never again. Police lights approached, but Alex's influence ensured statements were taken quickly, the attacker vanishing into custody with ties traced back to Marco's lingering allies. Sarah sat in the warmth of Alex's Suburban, blanket around her shoulders, watching the lake's dark waves. Later, in the safety of the new apartment, Ethan asleep down the hall, Sarah faced him. "I can't do this," she said softly, tears streaming. "The fear, it's too much. I have to protect Ethan." Alex's heart shattered. Love and remorse warred. "I'll fix it," he vowed, voice rough. "I'll step back if that's what you need, but I can't lose you." Silence stretched, heavy with pain. Sarah looked into his eyes that had seen darkness, yet looked at her with pure, burning devotion. The poor, powerless woman inside her screamed to run. The woman who had tasted love for the first time reached for him. "I'm terrified," she whispered, "but losing you scares me more." He pulled her close, kiss desperate and tender. Passion reignited, fierce and healing. Clothes fell away this time, boundaries crossed in a storm of need and reassurance. Bodies entwined, they found solace in touch. Love expressed without words, intense and explosive, sealing what threats could not break. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets, Alex held her as if she were the only light in his shadowed world. "I'll burn it all down before I let anything touch you again," he murmured against her hair. Sarah pressed closer, heart torn yet finally choosing. Poverty's chains had loosened. Fear still lingered, but love, fierce, redemptive, held stronger. The betrayal had been faced. The worst threat survived. Together, in the quiet after the storm, they began to believe in a future neither had dared imagine. March winds swept Chicago's streets, carrying the first hints of spring. But for Sarah Jennings and Alex Moretti, winter's chill lingered in the heart. The night on Lakeshore Drive had scarred them both. Sarah woke often from nightmares of spinning tires and crashing metal, her body jerking awake in cold sweat. Ethan, sensing her fear, clung closer, his small hands seeking reassurance she struggled to give. The new apartment's warmth could not reach the numb places inside her. Poverty's old ghosts, hunger, eviction fears, the humiliating scrape for survival, had been replaced by a newer terror, that love itself might cost her everything. Yet love held her steady. Alex was a constant now, quiet mornings bringing coffee and fresh pastries, evenings reading to Ethan until the boys slept, nights wrapped in each other's arms where passion burned away the day's shadows. Their intimacy had deepened into something fierce and sacred, bodies speaking what words could not, love expressed in touches that healed old wounds. Sarah, once powerless and alone, now knew the exquisite ache of being cherished beyond reason. It terrified her as much as it saved her. Alex lived in perpetual torment. The attack on Sarah had been the final fracture. Marco's banishment had not ended the rot. Lingering loyalties festered. Alex spent days dismantling alliances, confronting holdouts in tense, shadowed meetings across the city. One raw afternoon near the river, he faced 3 former lieutenants in an empty parking garage. They stood defiant under flickering lights until Alex's quiet words and unblinking stare broke their resolve. They left without challenge, but the cost weighed heavy. Another piece of his soul traded for her safety. Remorse consumed him. He had dragged her into danger, yet could not release her. Love, passionate, redemptive, all-consuming, demanded everything. He began quietly shifting assets, building legitimate ventures, preparing to step back from the empire that had defined him. For her, for Ethan, for the family he never knew he craved. Then the unthinkable struck. Ethan's remission faltered suddenly in late March. A routine check showed the disease surging back, aggressive and unrelenting. The Chicago specialists shook their heads. The experimental protocol had bought time, but a rare complication required immediate, cutting-edge intervention available only at a New York research hospital. The cost was astronomical. Hundreds of thousands uncovered by insurance, travel, extended stay, lost wages Sarah could ill afford even with her new job. Sarah sat in the doctor's office, Ethan's small hand in hers, world tilting into dizziness. Numbness spread as numbers were quoted. Tears came silently, tears for the unfairness that struck just when hope had bloomed. Her boy, finally strong enough to play outside, now faced this again. Poverty's ghost returned with vengeance. She had nothing left to sell, no one left to beg. The old humiliations flooded back, imagining charity appeals, government forms, the slow death of pride. She did not tell Alex at first. Pride, fear, the lingering belief she must carry burdens alone held her silent. Alex noticed anyway. The strain in her voice, the new shadows under her eyes. When she finally broke down one night, whispering the diagnosis against his chest, his heart shattered. "I'll fix it," he said fiercely, arms tightening around her. Inside, guilt and love warred violently. This was his fault. Stress from threats weakening Ethan's fragile system. Remorse tore deeper than ever. Sarah pulled back, eyes searching his. "Alex, the cost. It's impossible." He cupped her face, green eyes burning with resolve. "Nothing is impossible. Not for you, not for him." Within hours, arrangements were made. A private jet waited at a small executive airport. The New York hospital confirmed a bed. The leading specialist cleared his schedule. Costs covered anonymously. Millions redirected without hesitation. Sarah stared at the jet on the tarmac, wind whipping her hair, Ethan's hand warm in hers. Shock numbed her. From food pantries and overdue bills to this, private luxury, salvation at a whisper. Tears froze on her cheeks. The disparity crushed her. Once desperately poor, now carried on wings of wealth she had never earned. On the flight, high above the clouds, Alex sat beside her. Ethan slept in a plush seat, finally peaceful with medication. Silence stretched, heavy with unspoken weight. Sarah turned to him, voice trembling. "You liquidated something big for this, didn't you?" Alex met her gaze, no denial in his eyes. A shipping interest, legitimate on paper, but tied to old roots. His voice was low, raw. "I've been moving away from the shadows, Sarah, for you. This was the push I needed." Her heart tore wider. The sacrifice, for her son, for her, was beyond comprehension. Tears spilled. "You're giving up everything you built." He took her hand, thumb tracing her knuckles. "I built the wrong things." Emotion roughened his voice. "You taught me what matters. Family, love, redemption." He paused, eyes fierce with vulnerability. "I've spent my life taking. You taught me how to give. I love you, Sarah, not as repayment, not as protection. I love you, all of you, the woman who saved me twice." The words struck like lightning. Shock, then overwhelming surge. Love returned in full measure. Tears streamed as she leaned into him. "I love you too," she whispered, voice breaking. "I was so afraid to say it, afraid it would break." He kissed her then, slow and deep, passion tempered with reverence. Above the world, promises were sealed, love fierce enough to rewrite lives. In New York, the treatment began. Days blurred into hospital vigils, but hope grew. Ethan responded, the specialist cautiously optimistic. Alex never left their side, a steady presence in tailored clothes that drew curious glances from staff. He read to Ethan, brought Sarah meals she actually ate, held her through nights of fear. One quiet evening, watching Ethan sleep, Sarah turned to Alex. "You gave us a future," she said softly. "I don't know how to repay." "You already did," he murmured, pulling her close. "You gave me mine." Outside, spring rain fell against the hospital window. Inside, two hearts, once torn by poverty and shadows, began to heal. The ultimate sacrifice had been made. Redemption, hard-won and profound, took root. Love had conquered the darkest threats. Together, they would build something new. 6 months later, on a warm September afternoon in 2025, the sun glittered across Lake Michigan like scattered diamonds. Sarah Jennings stood on the shore in a simple white dress, the lake breeze lifting her hair as she watched Ethan chase waves at the water's edge. His laughter rang clear and strong, no longer the weak cough of illness, but the pure joy of a healthy 7-year-old boy. The treatment in New York had worked completely. Remission held firm. Doctors called it a miracle. Sarah knew it was love, love that had moved mountains. Beside her, Alex Moretti waited, tall and handsome in a tailored linen suit, green eyes soft with emotion he no longer hid. The empire he once ruled from shadows had changed. Legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, charitable foundations, now formed the core. Old ties severed cleanly, rivals quieted by his deliberate withdrawal. The confrontations that once marked his days had faded. The city whispered of the Moretti who chose family over power. Yet the journey to this day had tested them both. Sarah's heart still carried echoes of poverty's cruelty. Some nights she woke, reaching for a coat that was no longer needed, or checked the refrigerator twice to be sure food remained. The disparity once so stark, her threadbare life against his wealth, had softened into partnership. Alex never flaunted. He simply gave, quietly and without expectation. A new home overlooking the lake, Ethan's private school scholarship, a nursing position she loved at a community clinic she helped shape. Each gift accepted with tears and gratitude, each one deepening the bond between them. Alex's inner torment had not vanished, but it transformed. Remorse for past choices became fuel for better ones. He mentored young men from struggling neighborhoods, funded education programs, built playgrounds where none had existed. Love for Sarah and Ethan had rewritten him, passionate, protective, redemptive. The violent conflict that once tore his heart now resolved into fierce determination to deserve the light they brought. Their wedding was small and intimate. Close friends, Aunt Mary wiping happy tears, Ethan in a tiny suit carrying rings on a velvet pillow bearing the Chicago Bears logo. Vows spoken against the lapping waves promised forever, through shadows and light, poverty and plenty, illness and health. That night, in their lakefront home, passion reignited with the intensity of everything survived. Clothes fell away slowly, reverently. Touches spoke gratitude, forgiveness, triumph. Bodies moved together in perfect rhythm, fierce yet tender, explosive yet healing. Love poured out in whispers and gasps, sealing the journey from train strangers to soul-bound partners. Skin against skin, heart against heart, they celebrated life reclaimed. In quiet moments afterward, lying tangled in sheets with the city lights distant below, they drew life lessons from the fire they had walked through. Knowledge that true wealth lies not in money, but in compassion. Knowledge that love crosses every divide, rich and poor, shadowed past and hopeful future. Knowledge that second chances are real for those brave enough to give them. Knowledge that family is chosen, not born. Knowledge that redemption begins with one act of kindness. Sarah traced his jaw, voice soft. We learned the hardest lessons together. Alex kissed her palm. And the most important, lesson of forgiveness, lesson of courage, lesson of choosing light over darkness, lesson of building instead of taking, lesson of loving without fear. They spoke often now of education, how it opens doors poverty slams shut, how sharing knowledge lifts entire communities. They established a foundation in Ethan's name, funding nursing scholarships and childhood illness research, believing education and knowledge could break cycles they both knew too well. Love, they understood, knows no skin color, no bank balance. It sees the heart beneath. Wealth and poverty cannot separate true compassion. Only fear can do that, and they had conquered fear together. Sarah's days of shivering in the cold wind, of choosing between medicine and meals, were gone. Yet she carried the memory humbly, using it to help others still trapped. Alex's empire of shadows had become an empire of light, one built on love, family, second chances. As the moon rose over the lake, Ethan asleep down the hall, Sarah and Alex held each other in quiet, condensed stillness. The tearing storms of heart and circumstance had passed. What remained was peace, deep, hard-won, eternal. If this story has touched you, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Alex Truths, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope today. We upload engaging stories every day that remind us love always finds a way. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever seen love overcome impossible odds in real life? Share your heart. I read every comment and treasure the emotions you trust me with. Wishing all of you good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. See you in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.